I hope you guys have had a good painting week, or maybe in this case, a good few days. Sagi writes, I wonder what your thoughts are on William Adolph Bouguereau. I think he has many similarities with the Boston School, and although his paintings are very detailed, it has a lot of value play and the quality of the Arabesque. Yeah, Sagi, I get the impression that from a lot of people I talk to who are out of the LAC background, there's a certain amount of confusion, and tended to hesitate to talk about Bouguereau for numbers of reasons. The primary reason I talk about certain people like Velasquez is because their absolute connection to the Boston School's way of working. Bouguereau and the Boston School aren't even slightly close in their way of working. And remember, the method is the school, okay? So the methods are wildly different, and I'll show you how that works. But there's no reason I shouldn't mention Bouguereau. I've always liked Bouguereau. I liked him from the first time I saw him when I was a young man in Denver. There was a couple girls sitting in a field. I think it may be the picture I'm using here. I think it isn't one of the pictures I'm going to use here, but I think it isn't, but maybe. But so in one sense, I say what's not to love about Bouguereau. But when you look at Bouguereau in relation, by the way, all the other painters of that era, including Jerome, you see a tendency of Bouguereau to go what I would call photographic. And I don't, that's one of those, as over time, I find him less and less of a pleasure to look at. I prefer looking at Leighton or Ang and a number of other people. Ang's older, of course, and Leighton is probably maybe slightly older. Interesting to think about a person like Bouguereau because he was actually alive at about the same time as Monet and some others who were really totally divergent. And meaning I think he was born in a similar time frame in Degas. So these guys were all operating in the field of painting and going in very divergent directions. The world had rather been freed up, if you want to say it that way, from the academy, from the academic, for bunches of reasons. I mean, there wasn't enough money to be made through the state anymore, and churches, whatever they were doing, there doesn't seem to be enough of that for many people. So, but there are a lot of people who wanted to paint. At one point, somebody said I read it somewhere. It doesn't even seem believable, but at one point there were 10,000 flower painters in Paris, or maybe it's in France, but it just seemed a little over the top. But on the other hand, that culture, along with the Italians, have really represented this, a fascination with painting. But Bouguereau has been referred to as banal and a few other things by the modern critics. In his own day, he was referred to as Bouguerote, which was a play on sounds or something, Bouguerotic, a play on his name. And you can see that. I mean, his skin is like, I don't know if there's anything in painting quite like it. In fact, Leighton studied, he went to Bouguereau and got insights about how to make his skin better. And you can see a distinct difference over time in Leighton's work. But that skin thing, he's not as good as Leighton when it comes to great forms and his orientation around, I don't know what you call it. I don't want to call it littleness, but a certain fineness. Especially when you're talking about surface travel. There's a way of his working that seems to be actually significantly more piecemeal, like a lot of the modern. Although he's much bigger conceptually, like for example, he does an ideal head. Most of the time, his women look like the same person, so that's what we call an ideal head. It's the woman type, And his body types are pretty similar. He's got his type, and which is fairly consistent with the imaginative painter. There were others around him who were using photographs, and they looked like photographs, and even some of the guys who were buying into impressionism did that. And it's not a look that. There are issues about it. It's not a subject for this video, but I'll just start talking with a picture in hand. These are the after the one I saw in Denver. I wonder if it's right here. No, it's not. When I was a kid, I think the one in Denver might have been one of these two left ones by Bouguereau. So those are the ones I observed, and one of them, and that's why I say I think it's the top one. One of them I observed the toes, just the juicy quality of these toes, the ridiculously literal truth of the toes, but just really magic skin. So there's the skin man, right? But it was, and I don't remember thinking the painting was bad or anything. No, I mean, for sure it didn't. I mean, it was one that I admired at the time. And don't despise now. I just deviate from the way he thinks in most points. But so when I came to study with Gamble, or even before that in New York, the picture on the right, I think is at the Metropolitan. There's a picture like that, about that size. And I can't believe I've forgotten, but I think that one down below is there. And what's not to love, except there was something about it that I didn't. There was something about it that was just oddly superficial, and I didn't know what that meant at all. And as Sagi says, he's doing some entertaining arabesque, or rather silhouettes, and and has other qualities that you think of as being good in design. I find that he does things in design, like this is one example of it, where he doesn't actually nail the design. He gets good ideas, does a pretty good job, and then he does something else, and he just doesn't end well. And I'm not entirely sure what his thinking was. He may have been doing something, but he like the location and direction of the feet down here seems to be problematical in this picture. But that's going to be a composition question for another day. Okay, but those things over time. But just something about his work that I just didn't keep looking at it. I just didn't keep liking it. And then in Williamstown, there's this magnificent picture that must be at least 10, 12 feet high by Bouguereau. Ridiculous, the Nymphs and Satyrs picture. Just a delight beyond measure. Magnificent thing. I used to sit in that in the big lobby area. I think it's now the bookstore or something like that, and it just was grand. It was, it's sad where they have it now. It's just like one of many other pictures. They don't appreciate what that scale, what the scale of a room can do for a picture of large scale itself. But so that's Bouguereau, and that's Bouguereau to my mind at his very best. And yeah, so what's not to love, right? I did observe at the time that his painting of grass and that sort of thing, even the skin tones are rather formulaic. Now, they're not entirely, and I know he had the model in front of him working from the form, but he looks like he's trying to get all the girls to be the same color. That's pretty typical of what you do when you're doing an imaginative painting. You want to hang together. Well, you want the figures to look like they're of the same world. And so you use similar body types, and you use similar head or hairstyle types, and so on, and skin color is one of those things. So, that's to be expected in an imaginative painting. Well, the Boston School doesn't do imaginative painting. They occasionally do things like that, but their world is that of nature right in front of them. And so, once you start talking about the method, these are two entirely different worlds, and I'll walk you through the method in a second. But this is the Boston School world, and if you just want to look quickly at it for a second, I'm trying to blink on and blink off. There it is. Whoops. There's this, and then there's this, right? Boston. So you don't see a similarity at all, do you? I mean, there's no color quality. Did I go too far down? I did. I meant to do this. Sorry. So here is Joseph DeCamp on the left, Tarbell on the right, Paxton down here, and this is Benson. Now, you're going to, in all of these, but most particularly in these two guys who are the heart and soul of the conversation about Boston School thinking, you don't see anything like the way of painting of a Bouguereau. These guys paint. First of all, they use brushes without outline drawing. As I say, they're not doing a preliminary drawing. You're betting that these things were all stroked out in outlines and then drawn one character at a time. Not even close to the way the Boston School works, not even a little. Now, as I said, these are formulaic. The Boston School doesn't use formulas. Boston School takes a prismatic palette that has a good color range in it and just searches out the color movements, taking nature not as a cue, but trying to get the magnificence of anything they set up, just trying to rein it in, really bring it home. So it's the look of nature, in the search for beauty right there in front of you in the look of nature. That's an entirely different world. So now, Sagi, you're probably saying that, don't you see they might be composing as well or similar? Well, you'd hope so. You'd hope that our guys didn't lose some of the secrets of composition or the secrets of color relations or any of those things, and they certainly didn't. But the life, the life in the skin is really nice in Bouguereau. But when you see them at like a distance, they drop dead, right? That formula doesn't work well. When you see this Paxton, and that's not far from what it really does in nature. It's a little, monitors always make them a little strong, brighter, richer, whatever than they really are. But you'd argue that the Bouguereaus have that same chance, right? Here they are on the screen, and yet look at the live richness of these faces here. He's not making this stuff up. This is real. This guy's being dragged down by the formula, and the fact is, he looks like all these things look like they're painted in the studio. So and he doesn't go outdoors, and virtually nobody did back then. He didn't go outdoors to hit notes and find colors and all that sort of stuff. And I say virtually nobody, but shortly was Monet doing it, as he uncovered a way of empowering light with color. So so again, this is outline-based work. This is mass-based. Put down a stroke and leave it. And it's not put down a contour and fill it in. This is all over the place at once, painting. You'd set a green note up here and a pink note here and some white ones and some others. You'd be spotting these colors around as a Monet thinker, and then you'd be drawing in the visual order. That's nothing even close to what Bouguereau's doing. And so I'm adding one last point here about me, and that is that I had this in my studio personally. This one you can see online, and I copied it there in person. And I had one idea in mind, and that was to understand his color, and I wanted to know whether my palette would produce his colors. And I found that not only would my palette produce his colors, but that he wasn't very complex, and he wasn't doing. I found I could reproduce his exact effect without glazes. There were a number of things like that actually surprised me. But one thing is he used a much smoother, softer brush. There's certain parts of this feel I could match them with a bristle, and certain parts I actually couldn't. So at times I would say he used a smoother brush. Other times I couldn't have sworn to that. Again, this one I copied a painting by Paxton. Maybe a similar time, maybe a little later. And the skin tones like this were that different from the skin tones of this picture. They were that different. This was like, in a sense, like mud. You can see how guys painting in these formulas like yellow ochre. But the guy painting, and this is one of the women from the what do you call it, the new necklace. This is the girl standing, looking at the necklace, or showing the necklace, whatever's happening there. But I copied one in my studio again, and I found with Paxton I couldn't even begin to match these colors without using some of the cadmiums, which Gamble told me he didn't use. At least at that point he was saying that to me. So I just wanted to know, though in both cases I was really looking at these to understand their color and what colors they used to make those notes and all those sorts of things. I shouldn't say that I used the full spectrum color. I didn't use the one I finally do now. I think I used Gamble's palette, which had earth tones and yellow ochre and stuff like that in it. So I should take that back. I'm simply showing you this one here. This is Joseph de Camp. I'm just showing you another head. And you can see that the quality of drawing is there's nothing better about this drawing than that de Camp. But what you're going to see is that there's a greater orientation toward articulating the precise difference between this edge, shall we say, and this edge down here, between this edge and this edge, the contrast, all these things. This guy is just sitting around doing these kinds of things, adjusting them to each other in a relational way. This picture has less of that. It still has it because you can't even be a painter at all if you don't have it. But I'm saying that these guys oriented themselves around the visual order, the strong players leading, the high contrast leading, whereas this guy would have had a drawing underneath. And Paxton sometimes would too. And I couldn't tell you about this one. However, one thing I want to say to you, and I've said it before, is don't be thinking that this way of working doesn't lend itself well. My way of working, that is the Boston School, all over the place at once in the start, all the horses at once, coming out of a fog way of thinking, doesn't enable you to get just as much realism. But what it does do is it enables you to get more color than a guy who's simply stuck himself into a formula. So leave it at that. Again, if you're talking about a guy who's actually evolving a color plan for a painting and he needs formula to speed up the process, if these are elaborate pictures with lots of figures, you could understand why he would go and search out and try to find one that would be very adequate to his mission, something that he could reproduce over and over again. So drawing like this might actually be a model of that kind of work. So now I'm showing you on the right the two, this should be very distinct to you, the difference. But you can see the fine articulation of the fingers in both of these guys. You can see the difference here. I'm going to show you that more carefully in another picture. But the difference between these pictures is singularly not that this one. These paintings here are not about outlines of objects. These things are nothing but outlines of objects, outlines of everything. And I'm not picking on it. I'm saying, Sagi, don't misunderstand. This process is different. This is a different way of working. So, and yes, of course, they're drawing figures. So, of course, they're going to be the same in numerous ways. And these guys both have the same kind of academic background initially. So they understand, for example, the science of light on an object and all those standard things. But what you're seeing when you look at this one and you see a looked into shadow, you won't find that in a Boston School painter. Now, you might occasionally find it, depending on the lighting, but the idea that they would actually look into a shadow like this, they're bigger than that. There's a certain breadth to their work. You can feel a linear fineness in this work. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't love it. I'm just trying to show you differences. And the very cut out linear fineness, so much so that I keep saying it's like the photograph. But when you get to these kinds of paintings, they are not like the photograph. They have a greater breadth and a different approach, a different idea. So I say again that this is object painting, and this is impression painting, right? So if you understand that, you begin to understand the difference. Does that mean that this person, I mean, these guys get delightful silhouettes. I mean, that what we call the patterns, the patterning thing is good. It's very nice patterning. But the Boston School guys don't they don't worry about making the patterning of all the objects they make. They worry about making the patterning and where the patterning happens here and there in places. But that's being, on my part, being too fine. One of the things I observed in the working with a couple different students who came from LAC, came to me after working with LAC, and then reading what LAC said about this impressionist painting that he did, and he did a grisaille under it. I mentioned this, I think, a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago. But the thing about LAC basically is that he's a Bouguereau type painter. And the Boston School and Bouguereau aren't the same thing. So what confuses people, maybe Sagi's one of those people, is that they do work much more like the academics, and they glue in impressionist color, but they don't do the method of the Boston School. But they call themselves the Boston School. So the confusion is serious. I mean, they are not Boston School, they're Gamel School. That's basically Gamel's way of working. We would draw outlines, we would actually trace them onto the canvas, and we'd fill them in, and that was the standard, absolutely the norm for imaginative painting. Anyway, so you've heard that, but I was just thinking that it came to me that you might have been out of that background or read stuff from their background. LAC is not the Boston School. I'm just assuring you that it's not Boston School painting. I would love to have people who think it is tell me why they think it is, except for the words that people offer out there. But it can't be defended because the Boston School means the method. Nobody paints this way. Nobody paints the way the Boston School guys did. And I'm going to show you some starts in a second. I just wanted to show you these to show you some of that, give you a little more of that feeling for the difference. But Bouguereau would most frequently do drawings, and then he would turn them into paintings. So you presume that he did something like a tracing on here. And there are photographs of him working where he's got little girls in his place, and he's got a traced outline where he's then filling in. And by the way, I've done some imaginative, that's what it is, yeah, some advertising work. And I thought it's way simpler to work that way. You have to make a figure out of your head, draw the figure, and then just start filling it in from top to bottom. It's very efficient. And you know what I mean? There's certain different requirements. The Boston School thinking, though, isn't that. Boston School is really literally looking at nature as a color package, and then just wondering where you'd start, what would you do here, what would you do there, and be all over the place at once is not the same model, okay? Well, the Bouguereau model is a little more like that. It's like those guys who say they start at the left side of the figure and work to the right, or they start at the top and work down. But here, so this is a tarbell on the left and a decamp over here. And you can see that there's a certain quality of what I call life in these things. Now, some of it's in the color qualities because they're always pursuing the color qualities. But others of it are just in what I call the dither. You hear that word dither, where he's not chasing down every hair and trying to tidy it up so it looks like a comb went through it in the right way or something like that. Which would be actually, it's fairly characteristic of Bouguereau. It's also characteristic of Ang. Not that he's drawing Ang in that case, he's not drawing hair, he's actually drawing shapes and getting the beauty of the shape and the mass and the form. But these guys are into effects, and that's a wildly different world. And they paint from effects, like literally are led by effects. So again, read the Benson's book, The Advice to His Daughter, and I can get you that. Somebody asked for that. Be sure you send me your email address if you've asked me for that recently, because I don't know how to contact you through my comments section. So in the case though of seeing, just seeing, so these all guys all agree this is the leading edge, right? The turning edge is here, turning edge here, right? Leading edge here. This is just the way the world looks. How you get there is the different part, is what's different between the Boston School. And where you frequently leave off, of course, is quite significantly different. So, oops, come on back here. Now, what I wanted to show you here, there's a couple things. Now, you can see down here where I'm showing you how it works. We did this in our work. We would do brown paper. This looks like it's on brown paper. And we'd trace all these shapes onto here. Then we would start this massing to show the patterning that Sagi's talking about. I think that was the word you used, Sagi. I'm going to take a quick peek to see if that's the word you used while you're looking at that. The quality of the Arabesque. Okay. Now, yeah, that's different actually. So the Arabesque, that's interesting. Okay, I'm gonna get back to that word then for you, because that's not. Yeah, I would hardly agree that there's the same thing. Let me look at this one with the question of Arabesque. So the Arabesque is the figure created by the leading lines of a composition. The Arabesque would be this thing into this thing into this effect down here, and the dance, the play of these things in relation to each other. The Arabesque is the figure created by the leading lines of a composition. So I don't see the same kind of play anywhere in the Bouguereau. First of all, because he doesn't isolate arabesques, he simply draws shirts, and so is this? But I would ask you, is this set of effects? Well, first of all, they're not effects; they're just shapes, right, or the spots. So, but is this set of effects as intriguing as this set of effects, which is so typical of Boston School thinking? And this one doesn't. You don't see that he's operating from effects, and the arabesque. Silhouette, yes. Pattern, yes. He's great at it, and all the most salon type painters are academics. But when you talk arabesque, I don't think he's there. I don't think he's even in that world at all. I would say, look another direction. The arabesque is not made out of objects; it's made out of effects, light effect at an edge, that sort of thing. And you can tell if a painter's been working on it because it'll be intriguing, it'll be magical, it'll be something really fun about this into this into this, or whatever it is that are these sets of effects into this. But if you don't see that, if you don't see that that's delightful, then you're not talking. Then you're talking about they just never saw it, they never knew about it, never heard of it. Once you get to the visual order painting, you're actually working with the arabesque right from the beginning. You're setting up your leading stuff, and you're getting it magically related. And by the way, when you're setting up, you make sure they look good in the abstract. When you look at your setup. So, am I getting long-winded here? Let's see if I can. Am I going the right way? Yeah. Yeah, you do just notice this one. There's no orientation around effects here. This is just drawing of objects, arms, fingers, dresses. This thing is less concerned about the dress. It's much more interested in the play of spots, in relation to each other. Fleck, fleck, fleck. So the spot thing, this is different. And composition is different when you become this kind of a painter. Okay. So now what I wanted to talk about here, somebody keeps saying that there's all these guys painted underpaintings. And that paint was so thin on the Bouguereau I copied, and I was looking for some evidence of underpainting, and I couldn't find any. The painting was incredibly thin. And it was on a very smooth surface as well. So probably just like these guys, similar in size. But you can see that he's got the canvas, and by the way, it's a toned canvas. I can't remember if I toned mine or not. I may or may not have. I think I toned it gray, actually, which I'd seen, like this one. I think I did that before I painted it. But literally, this guy paints. He just paints the color he sees and paints the skin the way it looks without some previous underpainting. There's no evidence, in my mind, of underpainting at all. Leighton looks like he might have done underpainting, and there's enough black and white paintings around by him that are in that class, but I have a hard time thinking that Bouguereau did it. Now, somebody may know something. They may have a picture or something that shows him doing it, but Ang, we know, did it. Even Ang, though, I'm not convinced did it every time. That's an interesting question. So back to this question here now of how these guys work. The Boston School doesn't even begin to work this way, right? Boston School works from effects, blobs, more like Monet, putting down blobs. But let me just move you over and go past this go through a couple things. What do I want to be in that right now? I think I don't. Yeah, let's not do that right now. That was where the discussion of effects is. But I'm going to go down to the, if I have it, there it is. See what you have here in is the pure evidence of his way of Bouguereau's way of working is these tracings, or whatever you want to call these drawings, preliminary drawings, that are fully worked up compositions. So this one and this one. And I've seen drawings by this guy that are huge. They actually look like they'd be the same size as the painting. So that's all interesting stuff, but it's no question that this guy has his whole canvas traced, and then and the evidence to me, like in those heads over there, is he painted one head or one body at a time and then moved himself around the canvas. Probably, my guess is, by the way, if he was doing it, he might have been doing the central figure first and working out. I can't be sure of that. How could I be? But the tendency to be piecemeal is huge. The Boston School is never piecemeal. After they've set up the grand ensemble, the relationships within the grand ensemble, which is the essence of the composition, placement on the page, all sort of stuff will be there. Then they begin to come in and talk about how much detail they're going to bring, and they will start then. And my speculation is they are already working that then on the leading areas, and the most leading areas they set up good composition will be the center of interest. So they would find themselves probably working down here in this area, if you're a Boston School painter, having set up all these color relations and having a beautiful, beautiful painting in that abstract way. So, but you see, that's the start. Well, I don't have an actual picture of a start, except that if you go back to that, this one, or that one. But if you go back to this one, you could guess that possibly that's what he did. Literally, he had a drawing underneath here, and he just started painting from the head down, kept going down, which a lot of people in this country like to do now, but it doesn't deliver the same results. And I'm talking about the grand composition isn't yours to be had if you don't put time into it. And especially if you don't put time into it early, before they become objects, before the whole drawing becomes a bunch of things. So I'm going to go back to that again. Now, this is the start, Boston School start. And in the Boston School start, you'll see what I'm talking about, the spotting of effects. So, but the drawing is limited, right? So it's not drawing outlines around objects. Now, some of it will be, because this is a cutout in nature, but a lot of passages of this stuff will be lost. But there'll be no effort to work on a face, right? Even, look at that. This is actually a portrait, and where's the work on the face? The work has gone into places like this. All those things like this, all this, the things that set up the composition and the design is where the work goes, and the color scheme is driving all that. The color scheme is what they're doing it with, for lack of a better way to say that. Okay, so you'll see them spotting around real colors right from the beginning, and then working up the points that they find they need to set up the composition. So we talk about the importance of exits. Well, they're getting light effects with these exits right away. They're not doing some preliminary drawing and having a vagueness thing there. And this exit here, it looks like a slice of life, looks like a floor, it looks like what it is without ever being anything except value contrast and edges, color value contrast and edges. But you can see this is a case in point where I'm saying that, so he's working in a section of the couch. Well, which is it? It's the section that reads best. You know, and if he has a little time, he may want to know where this is. But this is all about setting up proportions of this to this to this, getting exits in the right place through your viewfinder. And so it goes. That's not even slightly close to Sagi. Understand what I'm saying here is that when you're working Boston School painting, it's a whole different method in the Boston, and the method is the school. This is Gamble talking, by the way. Now it's his point. It's not just his. Other people say the same thing. It's obviously true. The method makes the school, right? But you can see easily that the results are going to be different if you start here than if you start with outlines like this. The cutout qualities of these things never go away. These guys, Bouguereau will put down on the canvas, when he puts it down, he has his tracing, and then he gets ink, and he actually inks the entire line. He'll ink it in red in some cases. So he inks the entire line so he can't lose the drawing. Well, if you're an imaginative painter, you dang well might want to do that, right? Doesn't mean you can't actually correct over it from time to time, but you really want to have a decent drawing, and then you want to, and by the way, this isn't that composition, this is an earlier phase. So you see how the guy moved his position, or he moved Bouguereau's. It moved, not hugely, actually. Yeah, but a number of things about this are different. This is one of those interesting ones you should look at with Bouguereau, all these little drawings for this thing, because it shows his struggles with composition. With Gamble, when we worked composition, we didn't draw a bunch of figures and line them up. We actually blobbed. we actually would, if you blur your eye at this thing here, he would put down a dark thing and then move this big middle tone thing through it and get that to be rather fascinating. And then he'd pop his lightest light into the middle of that and start thinking about spotting around a few lights. That's different from working a composition from the object, right? So you're going to get different results. Now I know, Sagi, it's not exactly what you're asking me, but are they similar in some ways? And the answer to me is absolutely no. They're not similar. Well, they're similar in some ways. Yeah, let's say this. They're similar in that they're painting human figures, or they're using figures as their subject. They use values and they turn form and they make shapes and all those things. They're all the same. Everybody's the same because we're painting representationally. We're painting what we see. So that's the limit, though, in my mind. There's nothing about their work that's otherwise rather like that. And again, when I'm talking about this guy, I mean, you're talking about spotting, and I find the spotting, for example, of these 3 feet to be rather obnoxious, right? But if you're a spotter, as opposed to a designer from the subject-based position, you wouldn't ever let that kind of a thing happen. That's not an attractive thing, and it doesn't do any good stuff for this picture. But if you're a spotting guy, you would get that set of things that are like each other to play better than that as spots on a canvas, like spots, spots relating to spots. And it's clear that in some cases he does it, in others he doesn't. You know, he's painted a lot of pictures, and I think a lot of students think that that's the key. The key is actually taking the time to do a great picture and get great skills rather than just getting a speed level and producing one kind of painting your whole life. I mean, the guy made $1 zillion, but if your goal is just money, and it causes you to demean the form, well, good luck with that, you know. And I think most of you guys aren't like that, but it does. It's a temptation for anyone. So now I'm going to show you this is a drawing. This is the world of drawings. Now, this is like what I call virtually a photographic rendering of this figure for a crucifixion or something or other, and or ascent to the cross or something. So you can see the difference between the Boston thinking right here. This difference is huge, right? These are blobs with leading edges, and they're just blobbed around. You can see the figure there. You can also see the atmosphere of the room and all that sort of stuff. These guys don't do this kind of drawing because they're not doing this kind of picture, right? So he was putting this down. Evidently, this is a small drawing. I think the drawing itself is, I don't know if it's even 14 inches high. I think it's smaller than that. Truth is, I actually don't remember. But what he's trying to find out is whether there's a picture there. He's trying to organize a picture also, just like this guy when he puts all these guys around here. But you see the difference. He's trying to find the picture in the value spotting, in the value disposition across the page, and the interrelationships of all those things that happen to the eye of an impressionist. But the design thought here is always based on the figure, and now he's trying to find a values thing in that figure subject, the action of the thing, which he's made pretty good. He would say to himself, oh, that's pretty good. Now I've got to go find the values. And I do that with students, by the way, in the composition class. We do this kind of work. We try to find a composition with just the storytelling elements. And then we try to find great spotting, distribution of spots, and that sort of thing. So we'll do something rather similar, but this doesn't feel the same, right? He's not in any search after what you call light effects or there's no sense that there's a direction of light even to speak of here. But you see the difference, though, anyway, when you start seeing the values. As I said, these two are very similar pictures in the sense that they're designs for pictures, right? And they're value studies for pictures. And this is then the next level when you finally get there. And he may have done this first. He may have done all these figures finally first, then traced them, in some way with maybe having a student or somebody blow them down, or blow them up, and then fill in the masses. I want to make just one or so other points. Here again, I want to show you how distinctly different. They aren't the same people. But you can see all the work here. This is, again, about drawing things. This is things and stuff drawing. This is mass value effect, okay? Wildly different game. Wildly different game. I can't begin to tell you how much a different game it is. Some of it you can see in the eyes where these are blobs, and then you see other places where, the articulation is the most important thing to him because he's going to paint from this thing. This guy is, again, I will assure you that he's trying to find himself a composition, or else he's just trying to do a nice little short study of the woman for his, but this is value work here is Boston School thinking. It's chiaroscuro based, it's lost and found, as a process, and it's all into the orientation around where are the effects and how are they playing to each other, which is purely abstract. It's not an object-based one. So when you talk about the people who like Bouguereau, I say that people in the lac world like Bouguereau because, and one of them actually intensely says that we make things. We don't make, or something like God made real things, and we make real things. Well, you can say that, but you can see that you can paint real things and actually miss half the universe. And I'm talking about the world of magic. And then, I mean, light magic, say, just chiaroscuro magic. And again, by the way, there's an example. Look, all this looked into stuff here. These guys here would never do that. They'd be out here and they'd get all the way down to here, and they wouldn't do any of this in a sketch. They wouldn't be working inside here doing subplot stuff. It'd be very irrelevant to them. Sub-level contrast and stuff. Doesn't mean there isn't a little bit of that here, but there isn't much. There isn't much at all, if there's any. What was the other thing I thought useful to say about this? Oh, and the other thing about this is, though, that these are delaying the idea of aesthetics. I mean, they might be trying to design the hair a little bit, but it looks like he's just trying to make the hair look like photographically like a hair looked. And you see that, by the way, and a sense, I don't want to compare him to Da Vinci because Da Vinci is he's purely aesthetic right from the beginning, no matter what he draws. And I don't think of that of Bouguereau. I think of much more of a realist. But when you get to these guys, they're back to talking about the beauty of the blob relationships, the value relationships, their interplay, their size relations to each other, and that sort of thing, and the effects and the play of form in relation to other forms. So the order of the edges is all part of the drama of abstract. You follow what I'm saying? The drama abstract. So yeah, man, it's all. I think I'll end on this one though, because I really want to show you the difference between the way of thinking, and you wouldn't expect the same results. But again, this is that object painting. You're painting fingers, fingernails. But that's your game. You're doing outlines of objects and then noodling them up. And of course, he's so fixated on this, he'll often miss big form because he's so fixated on noodling up the skin. And it's nothing. Look at this guy's colors. This color is good, but you don't have that same sense. You have the sense that he's articulating exactly something and something else, and he's doing something precise here, but he's not trying to show you both sides of a finger or anything like that. So there's now of course, if you're in a very brightly lit room, you're going to have a whole lot more to draw here, and this guy's in a dark room, so I don't want to compare them too closely that way. This one's probably in a little bit lighter room. You see the shadows aren't as dark as these shadows here, aren't as inky. But this is, by the way, this hand is Tarbell. These two are both from Benson, and this is Bouguereau. But I want to show you this classic difference. These guys, so you wouldn't even say there's anybody working from Arabesque here. The leading lines of the hand set of that group of hands, you wouldn't even say that. You'd say he's drawing objects the way they look with this stuff in front of them. But these guys look like they're really into this, playing to whatever, this set of effects, playing to each other, like really worked up, with that in mind as the table setter for any realism that happens after. And what they found, of course, is that the realism wasn't the game. They actually, if they didn't know it, they found it as they went along. They realized that the beauty of form and form play, the beauty of drifting, of darks drifting into lights as opposed to being objects, gave them a higher level of opportunity for what I call just eye music. The aesthetic on which. The stuff of which the aesthetic is made in the visual artist world. So, man, I must have gone on forever. Let's see what time it is. Oh, gee, okay. So Sagi, I hope that's useful. And but yes, I would walk away from the idea of the Boston School and the lac world are even slightly the same, and the realism is not the same. But if you can be a realist, if you've learned. And be good, and you can incorporate. But if you haven't learned this idea of how do you play this game, I'm going to suggest to you you're not really in the game. You're just making in most cases realists do this, and I think Western art is a disappointment. And finally, when you see color play in pictures, you realize that the realist is killing us. Right? Most Western art isn't very beautiful in color. So by the time you get to Degas, and I would love to have shown some Degas here, but that would be too much. By the time you get to Degas, you have this whole idea of life. The life in the color is one of the musical elements. And these guys, the realists, tend to make it harmless. And that's not good. I mean, that just takes one of your arrows out of your quiver, you know, I mean, it just breaks it. So it doesn't mean their colors are bad or anything, but where's the magic? You know, these guys are actually picking sites because of the color magic, the light magic, and the rest of it goes where it needs to go. But in this kind of a setting, you know, he would have painted faces with more care and particularity if he's trying to do a sweet little portrait of somebody, right? And these guys, everything he does is like sweet little portraits of people, pretty little toe portraits, and so on and so forth. This guy is into the grand abstraction of the big visual impression. This thing here, that's the game. So I welcome you to our world if you've never understood that before. And you know, and I really didn't want to turn this into one of those 45 minutes Bouguereau in the Boston School thing, but I guess I just did. In any case, Sagi, do well. I appreciate your efforts in thinking, you know, thinking things through. And to all of you, thank you again for your donations, for your sharing, for your subscribing, and the comments. Really appreciate them. All right, and we'll see you another day.